Good morning.
Good morning, Jane.
How disappointing?
Yeah, it's really disappointing. A lot more worrisome, actually, due to the fact that there was a sense of urgency coming into the negotiations, and that sense of urgency has not been taken forward by the politicians as well as by the people who were negotiating on our behalf as ordinary citizens.
Why is that sense of urgency not there? I mean, we know what's happening. The proof is everywhere.
Yeah, so I mean, there could be a number of factors. One of the factors is that one of the biggest emitters is actually pulling out of the Paris Agreement. There's just a little over less than a year for that to be effective. There's also the sense that the negotiations from a long time ago have always been quite removed from the actual external, the actual real world. And now we're coming to a point where not only do you have a youth movement that's trying to push the politics within the negotiations and outside to bring the urgency, you've got the climate related impacts that are pushing the sense that something is going wrong within society, and then you've got the changes in technology that are necessitating us to make sure that we start to think about addressing climate change in a more holistic sense. But internally in the negotiations, you still got the key issues that have not been resolved even before the Paris Agreement.
With the US pulling out of the Paris Agreement, I mean, that really is a statement for those responsible for emitting all of these toxins to just carry on as you are. Go ahead. There's not going to be anything to stop you.
We're hoping that's not going to be the case, right? Luckily, we've seen from different sectors and different quarters of society where even within the United States, they're saying, no, we are still in, even though if the national government is pulling out. But out of that, I think we underestimated the type of impact that's going to have globally, that not only is it the United States that is pulling out, but other countries are also kind of murmuring about not removing themselves from the actual agreement, but actually just weakening their position and weakening how much they're going to be reducing their emissions by.
I suppose it's always a problem, isn't it, when you've got a developing country that they say they need to rely on coal, like us, for example, in order to grow the economy. You know, they can't be held under the same rules as the US and more developed nations.
But this is what we agreed to in COP21, right? We agreed a new regime for all countries to be part of the same agreement under the same obligations. So it might be a question of, well, we should have negotiated better when we were in COP21, but now we're here. And the world requires us as countries and as individuals to take those bold steps. And if we don't get that political leadership from the top and in the platforms where it's being negotiated, we get instances where youth movements are going to be pushing. Civil society are going to start pushing the governments to do a lot more.
And you read about the devastation in Australia, how farmers are losing billions of rands because of the droughts there, the drought that we're seeing in this country as well. So clearly it is something that needs to be addressed. Is there any light out there? Who's doing something positive?
At the current moment in time, the light is not in the political space, at least with our identified principles. But it is within the movements that are there that are forcing the change. I mean, the biggest issue is that if we have to rely on just the movements to necessarily show us leadership, what we will get is a reaction against those political platforms like the UNFCCC to say, well, you've been around for so long, for 26 years, and yet you haven't been able to arrest and to deal with climate change as you had said in the founding document. So why are you still there? Maybe we should be designing a new process, or rather let's go back into our countries and force you guys at home to actually do what you need to do. So we should be wary about necessarily the reaction and the consequences of not necessarily delivering on its mandate.
South African youth needs to rise up, right? We need to,
a lot more again.
Needs to make their voices heard. What should the government now be doing here? What should, and if it's not the government, who should be pushing clean energy forward?
So I think with the and it's not just about the energy mix, right? But at least now we can talk about necessarily what has been in our back of our heads, rather, is essentially that the integrated resource plan has come out, which is essentially a large portion of what we have contributed to the world, and said, look, South Africa is heavily dependent on coal, and we're going to reduce our coal by X amount, and we want to introduce new technologies, particularly renewables, to be basically the bedrock of our generation and our electricity landscape. We need to focus on basically rolling that out, because that is our key contribution. The other facets of our contribution are around our agriculture, as well as the ability for us to be able to withstand the types of events like what happened in KwaZulu-Natal with those hectic cyclones, or well, let's rather say tornadoes, and also like kinds of floods, as well as the types of droughts. So we need to be able to increase our adaptive capability. Part of that is that we need to focus on our service level delivery at local government level, which is essentially increasing our resilience to these shocks, but then also to produce what is really key, clean electricity. And if we are able to do that and also provide the kind of leadership for the African continent to be able to also deploy that kind of technology, I think we will be able to have a much stronger hand in requesting and demanding the kinds of means of implementation from the developed world.
Happy, always good to talk to you.
Thank you very much.